just wanted to start by welcoming everyone to the 33rd Annual California Small Farm Conference. My name is Jamie Fanous. I'm a policy advocate with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. I'm really excited for today's session. I've been waiting for it all week. We have just some absolute champions on the line with us today. We've got Secretary Ross, we've got Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry, and soon enough, we'll get Assemblymember Rivas on the line with us. I want to thank you all attendees, panelists, and sponsors for making this possible. Please, when you get a moment, check out the expo hall to learn more about our sponsors. This conference was made free, but to sustain and grow this event, please consider donating to the California Small Farm Conference. This webinar will be recorded and posted on CAFF's YouTube channel. So if you missed something and you want to rewatch, or Secretary Ross said something just completely mind-blowing and you need to rewatch it, that's your moment. So look out for a follow-up email for more details. We've got Assemblymember Rivas on the line now, so we are absolutely ready to get started. So we're going to start this session with an open discussion among the panelists and then move into questions from you all. So please utilize the chat function to introduce yourselves, your name, your farm, your organization, where you're tuning in from, whether it's California or across the country. We want to know. We'll be taking questions through the chat as well, so please post those throughout the session. We're going to break that last half an hour of this session for your questions only. So please post some questions in there for our panelists. So some brief introductions. I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panelists today, and I'm going to start with Secretary Ross. Secretary Ross was appointed Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture, as we all know, CDFA, in January of 2011 by Governor Brown, and then reappointed by Governor Newsom in 2019. Prior to joining CDFA, Secretary Ross was Chief of Staff for the U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. Before that appointment, she served as President of California Association of Wine Grape Growers, as well as the Vice President of Agricultural Council of California. Secretary Ross has strengthened partnerships across government, academia, and the nonprofit sector to improve environmental stewardship and developed adaptation strategies to address the impacts of climate change. She has initiated programs to provide greater opportunities for farmers and ranchers to engage in sustainable environmental stewardship practices through water conservation, energy efficiency, nutrient management, and ecosystem services. And she has worked to provide greater access to farm fresh foods at school cafeterias through CDFA's notorious Farm to Fork program. Secretary Ross grew up as a 4-H kid on a farm in western Nebraska. She and her husband Barry own 800 acres of the family farm, where her younger brother, a 4th-generation farmer, grows no-till wheat and feed grains, incorporating cover crops and rotational grazing for beef production. And then next, we've got Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry, who has represented California's 4th Assembly District since 2016. She serves as the chair of the local government committee and championed the notorious Farmer Equity Act of 2017 that we all know and love. Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry grew up in Western Yolo County and has long served her community. She first served as a planning commissioner, then elected to the city council, and eventually serving as the first female mayor of Winters. As mayor, the Assemblymember oversaw improvements in the downtown area, worked to improve local schools, brought broadband internet to rural communities, built senior housing, and helped the area to become an agricultural food innovation hub for the region. Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry grew up and surrounded by agriculture, cutting apricots, or as Californians say, apricots, in the packing sheds, and helping her father in the walnut orchards. She is still involved in local agriculture, and to this day, she and her brothers own an 80-acre walnut orchard. Last, but certainly not least, we've got Assemblymember Rivas, who has represented California's 30th Assembly District since 2018. In In the fall of 2020, he was appointed as the chair of the Assembly Agriculture Committee. Congratulations, Assemblymember, and elected as vice chair of the Latino Legislative Caucus. A lifelong resident of his district, Rivas served 2 terms on the San Benito County Board of Supervisors prior to becoming an Assembly member. In his first term as an Assembly member, he has worked to secure the food first in the nation COVID-19 farmer relief package, which included critical efforts related to agricultural workplace safety, access to PPE and testing, temporary housing, and access to healthcare and the courts. He has also championed the Farm Worker Housing Act, which streamlines the process of building quality housing for farm workers and their families. Rivas was raised in Pacinas, California, where his grandfather was a farm worker in Almadine vineyards. Rivas and his brother Rick grew up in farm worker housing, cared for by their single mother and beloved grandparents who immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s. So now you know these members a little bit, just a little tidbit about these incredible members that we have here today. With that, we're just going to jump in to these questions. I've kind of broken them up by topics. And of course, the first topic that is on the top of everybody's mind is COVID. It's impacted our lives for this last year and in some severe ways. As the pandemic has nearly hit a full year, come in about a week, farmers in California continue to struggle to keep their farms operational and begin to plan for an uncertain future. This pandemic has resulted in loss of markets, unpredictable markets, and the inability for certain growers to sell their products, which has disproportionately impacted farmers that grow at a small scale, as well as Black, Indigenous, and people of color and immigrant farming communities. I want to start with this first question. In what ways have you worked towards correcting this inequity in COVID relief? And what are the programs that farmers should know about right now to get support? I thought maybe we could start with Assemblymember Rivas, and then it can be a toss-up between our other 2 panelists. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate being part of the conversation. Really proud to join Secretary Ross. You read through her bio, so we're incredibly lucky here in the state of California to have her as the Secretary of Agriculture, and I myself being a new chair for Assembly Agriculture, certainly going to lean on her agency and on her expertise, and then obviously my colleague Cecilia, Aguiar-Curry. She's been an incredible resource, an incredible champion for so many within the agricultural industry and across the state. I know she's really championing and spearheading our broadband efforts in the state, and so really proud to serve with her and be on this call with her as well. But obviously this is a very challenging time for everybody. The past year has certainly been a strain on all residents of our state. And within agriculture, I represent a district that is largely agriculture. It's a rural district. We have an estimated about 100,000 farm workers. I represent the Salinas Valley. We're considered the salad bowl of the world. I want to say we produce about 2/3 of the nation's leafy greens. And I can tell you that when I became chair of agriculture, my immediate thought is, look, I'm a lifelong resident of the Salinas Valley. I know all about leafy greens and what we grow here. But there's a reason why in the state of California, we're the #1 ag producer in the country. And that's because this is a state that's so diverse. And everyone just automatically assumes that agriculture is on this level playing field, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And so what I did is I embarked on this, statewide agricultural tour, talking to small farmers, medium-sized farmers, large operations. I met with the dairy industry. It's such a diverse state, and the same is said across the industry. But when you talk about the impacts that this industry has encountered this year, COVID-19, historic wildfires, it's been a very stressful time. We talk about the shutdown of our economy, schools, restaurants. 50% of agricultural markets were essentially shut down when you talk about restaurants and schools. And so that's a problem. And so certainly those are the conversations we had. Those are the what I heard is, the stress of this time on this industry for so many farmers. But it's really unique. I think this is a good question. You could talk about some actions we took this week in the legislature, whether it was part of the governor's the Golden State stimulus package, which provided our lowest wage earners, our most vulnerable residents of the state, with some direct payments and some stimulus, but also some immediate relief for our small businesses that could be utilized by agriculture. But it's really interesting because I just read a couple of days ago, it was the 2021 farm sector income forecast. And in that forecast, it basically said the USDA suggested that agriculture is in a strong financial position in comparison to the rest of the economy, and can expect higher commodity prices this year. And it's a great outlook, but that's not what I encountered. That's not what I experienced when I met with farmers on our agricultural tour. And so I just think that obviously more needs to be done in the way of COVID relief, in the way of supporting farmers within agriculture. We need to do a lot more to ensure that we are targeting resources and support to our most vulnerable farmers, or small, medium-sized, independent family farmers. We need to do more to support this workforce, a low-wage earning workforce, with housing. So certainly there are many factors that impact agriculture. Certainly we could talk about the uncertainty of trade markets. We could talk about the threats of increasing costs around production for many factors. And so certainly we're not out of the clear yet within the industry. And so certainly we've got to do more to be very strategic in our approach to support those most vulnerable and at risk, amid this crisis. But it's great to be part of the discussion today.
Karen, you are muted.
You would think after days of 16 Zoom meetings, I would know where that button is. I was going to defer to you, but otherwise I will just jump right in there.
Please do.
I do want to note, Assemblyman, I really appreciate the comments that you made. And those USDA projections are largely for commodity crops in the Midwest in particular. And they also include a lot of trade relief that went to those folks, and a lot of the relief that USDA had under their COVID package that went to those folks. And the one thing we know that many specialty crops were left out, and it was very difficult for small scale farmers where English is not their first language, to access those programs, which is why we have a budget proposal to fix that for any future budget things going forward. But I will have to talk about what we did at the department. And first and foremost, it was helping us all agree what is critical infrastructure and what is the essential workforce, which was getting agriculture recognized, grocery stores, and of course we know because of CAFF's leadership, making sure that farmers markets were included so that we had some outlets for all those farmers who depend on selling their produce to restaurants or schools or direct to consumer types of things. The second thing we had to focus on, because we were all scrambling for the same kind of protective equipment, we didn't want to compete with healthcare, but healthcare needed it, not just here, but around the globe. And so we worked with our Office of Emergency Services to make sure that we could deliver protective equipment throughout the season, and especially during the wildfires for the N95. And so those are a couple of things that we did. And then we stood up some new programs and expanded some existing programs, which was how do we take any of that produce or dairy that was destined for food service markets and pivot that to food banks so it didn't go to waste, while folks were trying to decide, is this a long-lasting phenomenon? We're going to have to readjust our entire production lines. And then we stood up the Housing for the Harvest program, which was part of the governor's package that was signed yesterday, that the legislature helped craft, with $24 million for Housing for the Harvest, to help all of our farm workers who may need to go into isolation. And it's interesting, the minute that bill was signed, I got a call with, given the new COVID emergency standards that are like exacerbating a really dire housing shortage anyway, is there a chance of using those rooms for regular farm workers, whether they have to isolate or not? And I'm like, where were you a week ago when we were working on this? Because it's a fabulous idea, because we know that's happening. So those are the things that we're doing. And the one thing that I was mindful of, because CAFF really advocated for some sort of emergency funds, specifically to provide technical assistance to help small farmers, BIPOC farmers, immigrant farmers to access these programs. And just because of the uncertainty of how revenues are going to come in, it didn't get included in the budget that passed, but that is part of the proposal for the budget that was introduced in January. And I feel that with the response that we're getting, we will have at least 2 to 3 years of funding for that to really make sure. And I'm very hopeful that we'll produce such good results with that. It will become institutionalized in future budgets. Thanks.
Well, thank you for including me today. And I could repeat everything both Karen and Robert mentioned. There are so many things I think people don't realize that, no one's ever done a pandemic, and we didn't know how to really handle it. And from the top all the way down to the bottom, we're all still struggling with trying to make sure the inequities are taken care of. They're trying to take care of people, trying to take care of our farm workers. And quite frankly, what I've learned through this whole thing is what the partnerships that we've had with the federal level, the state, the agencies, Department of Health, Department of Ag, how everybody's come together trying to make solutions for our farm workers and our essential workers. Robert and I sit on a committee. One is the Latino Caucus, and we have really taken that under our wings, is to make sure that we get out and share the news or share resources that are out there. Has it been frustrating? Absolutely. There are counties that didn't want to identify or help us with getting the data and the information out to our farm workers and to our farmers, as a matter of fact. And that was a big struggle. It was an uphill struggle for many times. You're trying to get PPE. There was complaints that, the farm workers won't wear it. I mean, it went the gambit. And if it wasn't for, I think, the leadership of the governor and the secretary to help us get that message out, it was really important, but it was an uphill battle. I think we have accommodated a lot of those initial needs that we had. And right now with the vaccinations, I am so proud, and many of you may know the Durst Farms, is that they went and had the California Department of Health, the Yolo County Health Department come out. They did vaccinations, from my understanding, over 250 farm workers. This is a partnership, and these are why we need public-private partnerships in many of these things, and particularly in a pandemic, and people came to the top. But Karen, but she's very shy about this stuff, but she helped get the funding that we needed for the relief programs for the working Californians, the small businesses. And I really want to thank you. Again, it's a partnership that we will all work together on this, but I think we have a turn of events over at the federal level. And I think we'll see some more help going forward, and that people will not be forgotten. And lastly is that a couple of things that we identified along the way was telehealth. And we wanted to make sure we had healthcare and access to healthcare for everyone in California. And telehealth was one of those things that we enacted earlier than the bill that we had signed last year. It was supposed to go enacted till January 2021. And we enacted it, ended up being in June. And it was amazing that how many of our farm workers did get some medical relief and help during that period of time. So telehealth was one of those things that I'm very proud of. The nation's looking at California and how we have enacted telehealth and making sure that the inequities for healthcare and the access are there for everyone.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. Thank you all very much. Yeah, I noticed the prioritization, the announcement by Governor Newsom recently about prioritizing vaccinations for farm workers, and I'm sure all of y'all participated in that. So I'm really grateful to see that happening now.
Can I just add on that? Mr. Rivas's district this week, Clínica de Salud in Monterey County got 5,000 doses, so that's really increasing. And as the supply increases, and I think we should all be very excited about Johnson & Johnson, I'm very optimistic we'll have that within a week to 10 days. And that's really so suitable for our rural communities and especially for our farm workers who move around. So I'm very optimistic about that. And then the governor announced that we had a windfall of doses. I don't know where they came from. Perhaps they dropped from heaven. But the governor has made it very clear that farm workers are the priority for that. And so we're in the process of doing allocations and standing up some new Optum sites. So all of us working together, and the fact that the voices advocating for farm workers, whether they're from CBOs or from the employer community, never relented, and that's what kept them there. That's where
right.
it's so important that we work together.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to transition to our second looming crisis topic, which is climate change. So yeah, climate change has really hit California hard. Farmers and farm workers in California have taken on an enormous challenge, right? A challenge and a burden, trying to grow food during extreme weather conditions, hazardous air quality, fires, you name it, California deals with it. And efforts to kind of adapt or mitigate, I guess many of the farmers on this call have subscribed or attempted to subscribe, to California's Healthy Soils program. I used to work as a technical assistant, and I was on the phone all the time with growers trying to get them to enroll, and it's a process. Or SWEEP, which is oversubscribed, as we've heard in the hearings this week. Both have been very popular about growers, among growers. So I want to hear from Secretary Ross, and maybe the Assembly members can speak to this too, but hear more about those programs and what are the goals with those programs, and then maybe from Assemblymember Rivas and Aguiar-Curry, y'all can talk a little bit more about what are the new opportunities, what are you prioritizing for your communities and for the state when it comes to climate change and helping growers, particularly small scale growers, since those are the folks that we represent, and farmers of color here in California.
That's great. So I'll start with the SWEEP program, because that was our first climate smart ag program that was introduced in drought. And unfortunately, I think we're heading into another one. A hugely popular program that really helps farmers cost share transition from flood to drip, or installing new cleaner burning engines that are more efficient energy users. So they reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, installing solar, whatever it might be. And it's been a very popular program. We have a total of $40 million proposed in the budget to continue that program, and it couldn't come at a better time. We saved over, I think we've had 828 projects that are out there. And we know for a fact that we have farmers that are, they've got the application ready. The minute there's new dollars, they're ready to apply, and we want to help that. I do want to comment that the program has worked so well because of the emphasis on technical assistance and making sure that underserved farmers and very small farmers have the same access to that program. And in fact, we try to meet a minimum of 25 to 30% of all grants going to that population to make sure that we're getting this up and down the state. And I think it's been very successful because of that. Our Healthy Soils program, I could talk about this all day long, so you better be prepared to shut me up. When we talk about climate, adaptation is important, but only agriculture and forestry, healthy forests, can mitigate climate change and actually be part of the solution because of the ability to draw down carbon and store it in our soils. And in doing that, improve our soil health so that it is more productive. All that microbial activity represents a huge percent of biodiversity that people don't think about, all that biodiversity that we're walking on with our feet. It also improves water infiltration and water holding capacity, which for a state like ours is very, very important. So when you think about all of these co-benefits, including pollinator health, cover crops and hedgerows become forage and habitat for pollinators and wildlife species. There's so many co-benefits, but the purpose solely is And the way it's funded and has been to date is to be part of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon. And I'm very pleased to say that it does that. I also have to call out the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, because saving and preserving active farmland is a much more efficient way of avoiding greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of great programs like that. I'm excited with the Biden administration's emphasis on rural America and the climate smart ag practices. Secretary Vilsack spoke to my national meeting this morning, and he's all over this. So hopefully we can expand the funding that's made available for this and really make sure that every small farm that wants to do this, every farmer of color that wants to be a part of this, and urban farms can be a part of this in addition to our traditional farming communities. Thanks.
You know, I'll briefly just say, Karen hit all the spots, but I will say is that, you know, years ago, we worked really hard on cap and trade and to make sure we had the funding for sweep and all of these things. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, this governor's done better, but you know what, the state hasn't followed through with all the enough investments for sustainable agriculture per the deal we cut. And so it's frustrating is that when we have great ideas and we think we're going to get the funding and then all of a sudden it's not there for us. There's no doubt that sweep, people ask me all the time when I'm in the field, what about sweep? What about healthy soils? All those things are really important. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to keep on the governors and cap and trade. We have to make sure the funding remains. And that's probably my most frustrating piece about this, because Karen has gone to bat and we've gone to bat to try to make sure we have additional funding. Now it's just to make sure that they follow through for us. And, you know, that's, you know, so one of those things that's very much on the top of my mind. The other one is obviously, and we can talk about it in a minute, but is trying to make sure our small sustainable farmers have some land and they have access to land. And so we have some ideas I'll share, and I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I'd love to have some input in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and you know, if I could add anything to that, you know, part of the Assembly Agriculture, our committee, we had just maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we actually had an informational hearing on environmental farming, where Secretary Ross gave a very you know, great a presentation on our state's efforts in this area. And really, our state is leading the way in comparison to all other states in the country, the programs we offer. But as you know, was just mentioned, it's funding, ensuring that we prioritize the resources and the funding to have the greatest impact through these programs. And then obviously these programs are very popular, they're oversubscribed. And you know, I think I mentioned in the first question how I've embarked on this agricultural tour, where a lot of our small and medium-sized farmers across the state are doing this stuff. They're doing regenerative agriculture, they're doing, you know, environmental farming. And almost in every case, this transition from conventional agriculture to regenerative occurred because of these state programs, because of healthy soils, because of, you know, the SWEET program, and through all of the assistance and the guidance they received through, you know, nonprofit organizations, and so very excited at the opportunities. Obviously, agriculture needs to play a much greater role in allowing our state to meet our climate goals. It, play a much greater role than it has. But certainly, as was mentioned, I think funding is critical, and I'm sure we'll get into this topic later. But one of these efforts that we're supporting this year is a bond around creating a more sustainable food system. And part of that, there's 4 key areas that we address in this bond. One of them is ensuring that we're leveraging more resources, more funding for these critical programs, Healthy Soils, SWEEP, because they are critical. And if we're going to get the most out of these programs, we certainly need to create greater opportunity for people to utilize them.
If you don't mind me just popping in here, one of the things that I think we'll agree on, Robert and I understand agriculture. We've been in the rural areas. One of the things that we had to do is educate our urban colleagues that help vote on these bills. And sometimes they are hesitant to vote on anything agriculture. And so we've had to have numerous conversations, and the things that have really been beneficial is actually taking them out to farms. So whether it's an urban farm or a large corporation or whatever, when they are out there, they are just like, I had no idea. I didn't know this takes this much time. So I think one of the benefits that we have is that, Robert went out and did a lot of these ag tours, and they were very helpful. I think some of our colleagues said, oh, I had no idea this is the effect of agriculture. When you talk about climate change and how agriculture work hand in hand. So it's all of this is just about educating our colleagues. And if you get an opportunity to meet any of our colleagues, please invite them out to your farm. Please have a conversation with them. We don't like to always have a battle, right, Robert? Sometimes just like, oh, we got to fight about something as silly as that, but we do. So please feel free and, offer them a tour or a conversation or a Zoom with some of our urban colleagues. Thanks.
It's done deal. You give me those colleagues, and we at CAFF will make it happen.
Good.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for mentioning the bond, Assemblymember Rivas. I think it's a great opportunity to fund these programs that we all know work, especially, as y'all have mentioned, small scale growers, farmers of color, they don't need to be convinced to adopt these practices. They just need the support. It's usually a no-brainer. A lot of them have been doing it for decades, but the support is always welcome. This next topic is focused on equity and policies and programs. It's been a few years since the Farmer Equity Act of 2017, which championed by you, Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry. We're very grateful for that work. But now in 2020, with the Black Lives Matter movement and increased discussion among social equity and emerging, we're seeing the beginnings of the food and farming community finally begin to reckon with these severe inequities in our communities, in politics, and in government. Building on that critical act, what are ways in which your offices and your programs are taking those steps towards racial justice and legislation, or programmatically? I think collectively we want to start seeing that progress. And as y'all have mentioned, California leads in a lot of things. And I think climate smart agriculture is one of them. Really, everything related to agriculture starts here. That's why I moved to California. And I think equity is the big one. So I'd love to hear some of your perspectives and thoughts around this. Up to whoever wants to start.
I was going to let the author of the report start.
Perfect. Great idea.
Well, I get so excited about this one because there's a couple things I always tell my office. What's the problem? How do you fix it? But how do you implement it? And to have the Farmer Equity Act actually implemented, and if it wasn't for Secretary Ross, we probably still wouldn't have that. And getting an advisor to actually run that program, that was the key. And so we have plenty of opportunities with having the advisor in our hands. And, I get phone calls throughout the nation asking about how we ran that. And then we obviously pass them on to the brains behind it, is the advisor. But, we just did a call with Nashville, Tennessee. I did a call with Germany. I did a call with Illinois. People want to know how that all works, and the legislators are very excited about how they could implement something like that in their state. So number one is that, thank goodness for California, we have a vision and we wanted to make sure that people continue to farm. But something I passed by Secretary Ross on was my crazy idea is I want to figure out ways that our small farmers have access to land. They want more than just 5 or 10 acres. They'd like more, but to get into farming, it's expensive, and they may not be able to get the land or the finances for it. But I was approached by a farmer who just recently passed away, who has quite a bit of land, and he's trying to figure out how if we do a tax credit of some sort, so we could have small disadvantaged farmers be able to afford maybe leasing a piece of land from them, 50 acres, 100 acres. So we're looking at that. I've made contacts with land trusts saying, do any of you guys have some ideas how we might implement something? So I'm trying to think outside the box of being able to give the opportunities to more small farmers. You know, a lot of our large farmers, the children are not interested in farming, but we don't want the small farms to go away. And so we're trying to think of an alternative. So that's something I'm going to be working on this next year. It's probably going to take a couple of years, but we got to be creative. And, you know, I think it'd be a really exciting bill to do. It will stir up the pot a little bit, but, you know, if President Biden really wants to have more farmland, hey, we'll help him out.
Mr. Chair, did you want to go next?
Oh, sure. I would love to. I was waiting for you, but the work that was done around the Equity Act was a significant step. But I think it should be mentioned that it's really encouraging that we have a new administration in Washington, where you have the Biden administration, you have returning Secretary of Agriculture Bill Stack, where they're talking about this, and they have made many mentions about ensuring that they are going to prioritize equity and really ensuring that we tackle this issue as a country. And so certainly that only is, will help us as a state is, we certainly have already established the foundation. I know, my first year in the legislature, we carried a bill, around reducing this barrier of land access to our socially, our disadvantaged farmers. It didn't make it all the way through the process, but that is something obviously that we continue to ensure that we get done. I know that we've introduced a few bills this year. One, again about land access for socially our disadvantaged farmers, but in every aspect of the agriculture bills we have introduced, there's an element of equity in it. Ensuring that we're creating opportunities and we're leveling the playing field to ensure that we're making it as easy as possible to create opportunities for this next generation of farmers. Because when you look at the industry as a whole in California, it's really it should be a huge concern for us all that small farmers, medium-sized farmers, they're going away, and so we have to do everything we can to ensure that we are expanding these opportunities to ensure that we have a diverse food, a diverse food system in our state.
So I'm pretty passionate about this. So, do this to me when you need to. First, I'm going to start on following up on the introduction of the report, and it took us a while, but we found the right person with the Rittenhouse, and so that is our farm equity advisor, and I want to call her out. I think she and her husband, as farmers, might be members of CAFF. So that's been very good, and the report was finally released right before COVID hit. And so we have taken those recommendations very seriously. And one of the strongest recommendations is we have to figure out this land access thing and longer term leases. It's very hard to make the investment in a lot of soil health building practices or efficient irrigation if you don't know if you're going to have that land in the next year. But a number of recommendations for us at the department that we are incorporating. And I think just this week, I think we've released it, or we're going to this week. We finally have gotten all of our boards and commissions and advisory committees that are always seeking industry input. One of the things we found is that very few farmers in this category knew about them. Oftentimes they don't have the time to serve themselves, but they would like to know more about that and our information. We now have everything that we translate when it goes out in real time is being translated into Spanish. We know that there's other languages that we need to do, but Spanish was the predominant one doing that. We've gotten all of our boards and commissions information into one portal so that people can click onto that and learn about that and have access. Even if they don't want to serve on it at this time, they would like to know, what is that advisory board doing for their commodity or their program that they care about. So those are some of the institutional changes that we've made. We're in the process of standing up, and I've started doing about once every 6 weeks meetings with a number of CBOs that serve socially disadvantaged farmers, farmers of color throughout the state to get input from them. And we're going to be standing up a small farm as well as a disadvantaged farmer advisory committee that will be ad hoc to me to give us input as we start to craft programs going forward. We're getting that input at the front end of the design, not waiting to go out for public comment, because oftentimes that's burdensome. So that's what we're doing externally. But I also want to talk about equity, and the governor came into office with the California for All, and it was not a tagline. Equity is the lens that we're asked to look at all pieces of legislation that we're analyzing. Equity, we were the first state to have a health equity index that we're using to guide where vaccinations are, where testing is, where all of the decisions that are being made on COVID are happening. So equity is very important to us. And for me personally, I was chief of staff when the secretary, then secretary, and now secretary, through a doctored video that was played nationally, ended up dismissing the rural development director for the state of Georgia, that is a USDA appointment, Shirley Sherrod, who was one of the leaders to get the Pigford settlement, which I was there for that, as well as Keep Siegel for Native American farmers. They became friends, and she has forgiven Tom Vilsack, but that was a learning lesson for me. And this summer, I just was so deeply moved by everything that was happening, and I wrote blog pieces to our employees, and I asked for volunteers for us to write a CDFA statement on racism, and it was done by our employees. And I've taken personally a lot of criticism for that, because we acknowledged institutional racism, and I do not know how you cannot look at the history of agriculture built on slavery and think there's not. And so we as employees, we just launched a speaker series on race and equity and the history of racism in agriculture, so that we as employees are learning together and having conversations together. We also are participating in the Capital Collaborative on Race and Equity to train people about implicit bias. We're all required at CDFA to take implicit bias training, so that when we're out with our constituents, when we're looking at programs, we're trying to look and be sensitized to what that is. And more importantly, how to guide discussions. There's a lot of people that want to have the conversation. They simply don't feel equipped on how to do it without creating an unfortunate situation. And that may seem like we should just be able to have the conversations, but I've talked to a lot of CEOs that simply they want to do it. We have to equip people to be able to do it, to have a safe space and an open place and an inclusive place for that to happen.
Oh, Karen, I love that. Thank you. You know, you don't know what's always happening as we work over at the Capitol, right? But that's really fabulous news. And I'm looking forward to passing that on at the Women's Caucus of the stuff that you're doing. So thank you so much. That is phenomenal.
It's such meaningful work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel privileged to be able to do it.
It's good for me, and I think plenty of folks on this call, to see a little bit under the hood of CDFA, right?
Good, bad, and ugly.
100%, absolutely. I think it's really, really incredible, and I'm even seeing through the chat that there's a lot of support for this. I think it's really important, especially in agriculture, right? As you've communicated, we need to be addressing this head on. We need to be addressing how our institutions are biased. And I'm grateful to hear that CDFA is taking those steps.
COVID has really just put the spotlight on our farm workers, our most vulnerable, our most essential. And I've always felt from day one, there is no direct connection to CDFA. We don't have programs for farm workers. We have programs for farms and farmers. And yet we had a chance to come into this space with the PPE and the housing for the harvest. And a number of CBOs just released through the Rural Studies Institute, really put the spotlight on what lessons learned for our farm worker community. And they asked if I would be interested in a briefing. We just had that on Friday afternoon. And we all agreed, we want to build programs. We want to build a connection out of COVID. Let's see what we can do. When we think about the circumstances of high temperature days, wildfires and prolonged smoke, in addition to COVID, and the housing and transportation situation, which partly is an affordability issue. What can we do together to improve the quality of life and the access to services for our farm workers?
You beat me to the next topic. I was going to ask about specifically about labor and farm workers in California, since there's kind of growing pressure, right, around who are the next generation of farmers and farm managers. We know that they're probably, going to be people of color. The space is very well suited for existing BIPOC farmers, particularly Latinx farm workers who have had generations of this experience and just haven't had the support necessary to take over. But there's still many barriers, right, in front of those communities to transition to owning and operating their own small farms, transition to leadership roles on larger farms, really just job creation among this community. I'd love to hear, maybe a little bit rapid fire about what are the policies and programmatic levers to support this community of farm workers and farmers to succeed and to really transition. And I'd be grateful to hear from Assemblymember Rivas, since I think this is has been a priority of yours, and we can hear from others as well after.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just really quickly, when you talk about farm workers, obviously, very, a dangerous job. I was raised by a family of immigrant farm workers. And, when we here in California, you talk about our economy, the 5th largest economy in the world, but this is an economy that has largely left our agricultural workers behind. Low wage earners, their wages really haven't jumped, increased over the years. But certainly when you talk about all the factors of housing crisis here in our state, yes, we have a housing crisis, but for our agricultural workers, it's a humanitarian crisis. You have workers that live in these critically overcrowded some conditions, unsanitary conditions that really it deserves our attention, and we certainly need to approach it very differently when we talk about addressing this housing crisis across our state. But as was mentioned earlier, I think a lot of it is about education and engagement. Certainly you look at a workforce that does their job and does it very, very well, but how can they break through and become farmers themselves and become small business owners? It's nearly impossible, and for all the reasons that we have already talked about. You talk about, just all of these barriers, lack of access to capital and to land. And so those are the opportunities, those are the areas that we need to focus on so we can create those opportunities. When I look at just, a small program that's under invested by our state, you look at the UC cooperative extension, these farm advisors, they offer these incredible services, technical assistance, and they really are a lifeline for so many of our small and medium-sized farmers. And it's a program like that where we've got to invest further to ensure that we're creating these opportunities.
I'll just chime in as there's so many good organizations such as CAFF, Center for Land-Based Learning. Over in Napa County, there's the Farm Worker Advisory Committee, and they are farm workers that have started their own, almost like a university on how to get into the business. There are areas within the state, at least in my district, that are working really hard on lifting up our farm workers, right? And making them, helping them get their own access to capital. One of my favorite stories is the Seha Farms over in Napa. They're a winery. He was a farm worker and he slowly worked his way up. He worked with a farmer that was willing to provide some land, and now he's a very successful winemaker. So it's all, I think we have to look at public-private partnerships. We like to look at your nonprofits. All of you that are out there watching this today, you are part of this solution. And we're here to help you. You need to tell us how you want us to help you. But I just think that we just need people to give access to capital would be really helpful, and just some guidance. Technical expertise is probably one of the things that stands in the way. But again, Secretary Ross has really helped us on technical expertise and getting information out to our farm workers who didn't even have a clue where to go before. So we got to slowly close that gap, and it'll happen. But it's people like you that are helping us move our goals forward.
Yeah. And I'll just have to call out ALBA in addition to organizations. ALBA is one of the first ones in the state that was about farm workers becoming the farmers themselves. It's a successful model, and we want to do more of that. But I also want to, I feel that one of the things we need to do is invest in our existing workforce to upskill their jobs, because we know as prices go up and wages go up, that all of a sudden the justification for investing in automation is there. And so the jobs will change and there'll be better jobs, but we can't leave behind the people. We're never going to get away from the kind of delicate perishable crops that we're growing and the need for hand labor, but doing things to automate some functions of that so it's not as backbreaking. So there's going to be different kinds of jobs. And I have to call out Hernan Hernandez, who is the executive director for California Farm Worker Foundation. In the last year, even in COVID, he partnered with Bakersfield City College to go out to the fields and talk to farm workers about what kind of certification programs they might be interested in as a way of adding to their current wages, whether it was in food safety training and getting certified for that, irrigation management, pest management, whatever it might be. It's like we need to invest in our workforce and not just leave them to be the same thing. Like there could be career paths that would lead them into being the next supervisors, and supervisors who don't bully people. I just have to call that out too. So I just think that we have to think about the total package and also make it attractive so that the children of farm workers don't want to run away from being farmers, although I was one of those that did that when I was growing up, but show the great, wonderful management positions and technical positions and science positions that are really terrific, rewarding jobs, but it's not the work that their parents and grandparents did.
Yeah, and if I could add something really quickly, I think it's such an incredible point. You know, you talk about an agricultural industry that is evolving. You know, you talk about the innovation, the technology that's being incorporated into the industry, into agriculture. And so in my own region, what you have is we're so lucky here in California that we have this state-of-the-art, just such an expansive higher education system. And so what we've, you know, and we've had the opportunity here locally to leverage our junior colleges who have worked specifically with ag industry to have these technical programs at the college. And so I visited, it was a strawberry grow, and they're started incorporating these raspberry grows, these substrate raspberry grows. And so now what they're doing is they sent students just graduated from high school through this irrigation program at Hartnell College in Salinas, and now they've hired them well-paying jobs. And so it's a different kind of farm agricultural work, but certainly it's the evolving nature of the industry. And so we're in a great spot here in California where we can leverage our junior colleges to really train the next, the next group of ag workers, which is, a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece is how do we transition to the next group of ag workers, right? We all know that the majority of farmers right now are facing retirement age, and especially for small scale growers, we don't want to see greater consolidation of our small scale operations. And unfortunately, with increasing prices of land and difficulties, that's becoming more of a reality. So I really appreciate all of those comments. So we have this last question that I have before we hit some of the questions from the audience here. We've got quite the list. Is, if possible, and maybe it's just too difficult, what are your 2021 priorities? What is the number one or number two? Maybe there's 5, so maybe this isn't a fair question. Priorities for this year, championing, or maybe I don't want to give you an answer, so I'll stop there.
I'd love to hear what the chairman and assemblywoman have to say.
Well, everybody knows what my priority is, and that's Internet for All 2021. So, COVID really brought the inequities out. And so we need internet for agriculture, right? We need it for schools. We need it for telehealth. We need it for economic development. So that is my #1 bill that I will die on a sword on. We got to get that one through. Continuation of telehealth. Telehealth is important for access to all people that don't have access to healthcare. And I'll be doing a controversial one. Hold on, Karen. I'm doing a Hemp Cbd bill, and it is, I consider a consumer protection bill to make sure the labeling, and it's funny, a lot of people think Hemp Cbd is legal, but it's not in California, and it's being sold everywhere. So I want to make sure there's labeling and that there's testing done on that product. So those are my top ones. I'll be doing some stuff on mental health, where I'm concerned about our students going back to school, and I like to have nesting birds. I've got, olive oil, virgin California olive oil. That was stirring up the pot, but everybody get over it. It's important to have. So those are some of the ones I'll be doing this year.
Yeah, and I think for our office and for me in particular, obviously our focus is on this pandemic, and ensuring that we get our state back onto a road to recovery. And as chair of agriculture, ensuring how we can best support our farmers, all farmers, small, medium, large farmers, and then obviously championing all the support we can for our farm workers and for agricultural workers. This is a dire time for them. Certainly they've had to endure so much this year: a pandemic, wildfires. And so certainly we need to do everything we can to ensure that they have the supports that they need. But as far as our specific bill packages, I think when Speaker Rendon appointed me chair of agriculture, he asked me, he said, what is it you want to focus on as chair of agriculture? And I told him, well, I want to work really hard because I'm an environmentalist. And so I want to work very hard to try to bridge this gap between the environmental community and the agriculture industry. I think there's a significant opportunity, as Secretary Ross stated earlier. We can't meet our climate goals in this state if agriculture is not at the table. If we don't do everything we can to sequester carbon naturally through our natural working lands, and really investing and showcasing the work that's already being done, and finding these pathways to incentivize these practices across the industry and across our state. And so certainly, so really just focusing on those efforts. We've introduced so many different bills, but really excited because, as I said, in California, we are really leading in the space of environmental farming. Cdfa, as was highlighted by Secretary Ross at our hearing, they have their own a division within the agency in this area. And so really, ensuring that we build on this foundation and create these opportunities to create a more sustainable food system in our state, I think is something that I'm excited to do.
So what they said, because their priorities become my priorities, of course, and I want them all to pass, so I have lots to do and will never be bored. But a number of the issues that I care most about are there, and so I'm just going to touch on a couple. I'm very passionate about continuing the equity and our own training so that we as employees of a department can lead on that. Helping to address hunger and insecurity and the role of farmers, and helping to do that given the numbers that we're going to be facing and how long we'll be facing them, and continuing the leadership and environmental stewardship. Those are really critically important issues that we will be working on. And then hopefully we'll have my small budget item on finding any pathway for regulatory relief. And we're starting on the reporting requirements, because not every farm can have a specialist working full-time on knowing what the regs are we in compliance, and doing all the reporting. It's especially a hard burden for small farms. And so I'm very lucky that Secretary Blumenfeld hears the same thing that the governor hears, that I hear whenever we go out. And so it's a small project. We can't solve it all, but if we can successfully get a couple of wins with that with our partners at EPA, it could be huge of really rethinking one size reg for every size farm is not a very good way to go. And I don't want to overpromise anything, but if we can get that passed and do something over the next year to make life easier for our small farms, that would be fantastic.
That's what I like to hear, just making things easier for the small farmers. Thank you so much. So that is the end of my questions. So we are now entering into the questions that my colleagues have so kindly put together in a Google Doc for me from all of the questions that have come from the attendees from this session. So the first question that's come up a lot is a pretty straightforward one. Hope you're ready. Why are farm grants so difficult to fill out? We are farmers, not grant writers. What can the state do to help?
So that's in my wheelhouse, I'll bet. And we've really streamlined the soil and the sweep one in particular. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback about the changes that we made. I do have to note, this is one of the challenges. Government dollars come with accountability and transparency. And so that's just one of the challenges we have. But I think on our individual grant programs, we've simplified those a lot, and we want to continue doing that. Our specialty crop block grant program is complicated because that is us putting together a program for the state that then has to go through USDA and OMB approval, and they keep adding more and more outcome measures and performance measures, and that one is more complicated than I want, and it really doesn't work well for individuals, but even for small CBOs. So one of the things we started 3 years ago is we do what we call capacity building grants, where we want to really help people that have submitted grants before and they're not there. And so we do hands-on work with them and technical assistance work with them to help equip them to better understand all the things we have to do on progress reports and receipts and all those things that come with grant dollars.
Great, thank you.
I agree with her. But it's crazy. I mean, I have only 80 acres and to go after any money. And I got a phone call last night from my brother saying, can we go after the mini grant money for business? I'm like, I don't know. Give me the, I haven't even seen the form yet. So it's this technical piece for our small farmers. And then, when you only have one employee and you still have to do all the paperwork just as big as, if you have 10 or 20 or 30, it just is so frustrating. And the information that we don't necessarily gather as a small farm. So whatever way we can alleviate some of that. But, I'll be the first one to say I am into transparency and accountability, because people will come right after us about asking us, well, where's that money going? Why is it going there? So, it's a tough thing to take care of, right, Karen? It's just, and Robert, it's just.
Yeah, and then that, when we had our hearing, as I made mention of earlier, the environmental farming hearing, the number one takeaway from that hearing, as far as, what's needed, it was, more support around advisors that offer this technical assistance. And as I mentioned, the UC cooperative extension farm advisors, they're such a critical resource for these, for so many farmers to apply for these very technical grant applications.
Yep, you're absolutely right. As a technical assistant in the past, I was completing a lot of those grant proposals or applications to HSP. But it's great because you got to build in that funding for a technical assistance provider, and that alleviates a lot of the frustration for the farmer. Sure. It makes it a little frustrating for us, but that's our job, so it's okay. So thank you so much. The next question is around USDA inspected slaughterhouses. So the question is, the regulations, the regulations around USDA inspected slaughterhouses are tightening, and the bottleneck is making it harder for smaller farms and ranchers to get in. Is there any move to ease this crisis, or to make it possible for smaller farmers to be able to process and sell without going to a USDA facility?
So just because my national meeting just ended and I chair our Food Systems and Nutrition Committee, we passed 2 policy proposals and 3 action items around expanding agricultural infrastructure for local for local regional food systems and small processing facilities. And I think COVID, we've been talking about this for 10 years. And getting away from federal inspection doesn't really help anyone who wants to sell across state lines. What we need are more federal inspectors and mobile has challenges, but we can make mobile work. And there's several bills that have been introduced, and we at the department are going to do our darndest to really come up with a good way of at least using that to ease it a little bit, because I think that would help signal more mobile slaughter as an example. But we also need more custom cutters and custom cut and wrap facilities as well. And that there again, there's some workforce development there. Our meat cutters are aging out, and that's hard work.
That's really hard work.
Great. I do not know much about slaughterhouses, so I'm glad that you were able to answer that, and I don't need to push back at all. The next question is around chemicals and pesticides, asking primarily, what is the state doing to protect our communities, as well as neighboring farmers from the harmful impacts of chemical-heavy agriculture. Yeah, I'd be curious here. I know that there's a mill fee in the mix, but yeah, I'd love to hear what y'all are thinking on that.
I'm just getting up on the mill tax and the mill fee. I integrated pest management to me is huge. And I think there's a backlog of studies that have been done that are sitting, trying to be processed. And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have enough people to do the processing of some of these great ideas. And so the farmers are upset with me, but I think we need to look at that mill tax and increase it so that we can, get this testing and the research done. I still have to look into it, but it was new to me. And so Karen, you probably have a lot more on the mill tax, but.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I could add, I agree. I think that certainly this is an issue where there's been a lot of studies and reports done. I commend our governor who phased out the use of chlorpyrifos, and so certainly efforts have been made. But when you look at I myself am I've had meetings with CDFA, I've had meetings with Cal EPA, trying to really understand this shift to this risk-based mill assessment system, to try to encourage the phase out of the most toxic substances that are used in agriculture and that are in all of our some consumer products, so it's certainly will be a big shift that requires robust debate in our legislature, which is I'm sure will come soon enough. But but this is an important issue, and I think everything we've talked about. We talk about environmental farming, we talk about regenerative agriculture. This transition leads into having a less of a dependency on the use and application of these pesticides. So I think that this is certainly an important issue, an important a discussion that we certainly have got to do a lot more, as Cecilia was saying, when it comes to the research and trying to understand all of the impacts economically, the health impacts, and so certainly this is an important issue.
So just from an administration point of view, Director Dulcini from DPR has made some good changes to accelerate the registration process for biopesticides and alternatives, because there's a lot of those types of products that have to go through the same kind of registration process, and he's done a good job on that. And of course the chlorpyrifos phase out, and the work group came up with a set of recommendations, and everything comes back with the same answer. We need to invest in the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources Cooperative Extension. We need more research specialists on campus doing the new knowledge and writing the reports and putting it together. We need more advisors in the field who are doing the field trials to get the data to show people how things will work. And we need more technical assistance just teaching what these new processes are. And we can't do it with one-time money. Glenda Humiston can't hire people on one-time money. So one of the things when the governor said he wanted to do this transition and EPA came up with this 3-tiered system of doing that, it was about investing in the transition and making sure that we would continue to be partners in this transition to put real money. So a total of $20 million in grants and in UC cooperative extension to help make this transition. And for the first 2 years, using general fund, so we don't wait till the money comes in to make the transition. It takes time to make these changes. And so that money, if this were to pass, and it's a 2/3 vote, so that's going to be a challenge, that's part of this, and trying to create the incentives to transition out of those most toxic uses.
And this is where we could use everyone's help, right? Because it is a 2/3 vote. And a 2/3 vote means you have 2/3 out of the assembly as well as the Senate. And if you know of an assembly member or a senator, and if you think this is important, pick up the phone and call them and let them know the importance of this, because otherwise they're going to say it's a tax and it's not going to get through. But they need to understand the background of it. And it's one of those things, educate.
Yeah.
And, Robert and I will be taking what we call vote counts and trying to figure out which of our colleagues are up on the bill and who's not up on the bill. And it could be very tough again. So we'll see. But
and it's just been, and if I could add something really quickly, it's just, it's such a difficult environment. It's very rare to, see any of my colleagues these days, just because of the social distancing. And so trying to have these discussions, which used to happen so casually in the past, just running from office to office to, have a discussion on policy or a bill or a proposal, that doesn't exist these days. And so if one of my colleagues wants to avoid my calls, he just doesn't answer it. And so that's, and there's, not other options because they're not in their office. And so it's just a very challenging way to do business.
Someone just asked, what's the bill number? Do you have a bill number on that, Robert? Do you guys know what it is? Or is it just a budget?
It's
a budget trailer.
Yeah. So keep an eye on it. We need to get it through.
Yeah.
And that's something that I believe will be taken up later in the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. We at CAFF are huge fans of the BIPS program, Biologically Integrated Farming Systems program, and have been trying. The mill fee would fund that, and that's a program that really helps small scale growers transition and integrates the farmer into the process. So yeah, hopefully that'll get funded. We're fingers crossed, but thanks for kind of communicating those barriers. And yeah, it's a tough space for a small scale grower who often doesn't use harmful pesticides or chemicals on their farm. So I think we're going to jump into a question about kind of access to resources among women in agriculture. The question is, California's Climate and Agriculture Network, recently reported on the Healthy Soils Program and highlighted that the awards to women farmers decreased from 28% in 2018 to 19% in 2020. These are huge disparities also exist among NRCS's conservation program in California between 2015 and 2020. White women made up to 10%, and non-white women made just 2% of the CSP recipients. For EQIB, again, only 14% of recipients were white women and 2% were non-white women. It would be great to hear from the panelists on how they think we might be able to better support women, especially women of color in accessing these conservation and climate smart programs equitably?
So the technical assistants and especially CBOs who serve culturally and linguistically in ways that can communicate with this. Quite frankly, none of those, specialize on the woman farmer. The American Farmland Trust does have a project in the state to really focus on that. I think that was, trying to think the grant program they used. And so that's the one that's got an exclusive focus on female farmers. And so I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned from that. But I would say that it's the same challenge as reaching small farms, and that is technical service providers, hosting seminars, making women feel like we have conferences for everybody but women farmers that I know of. We have small farmers, we have Latino farmers. We started a new one, in the state for African American farmers, Southeast Asian farmers. And I think people just expect the men and the women will come. And maybe there's a specific reason women aren't applying for these programs. Maybe they feel those aren't for me. I don't know.
Last year, Assemblymember Weber tried to run a bill for access to fund to financial backing for all women, and it didn't get out of finance, which is so typical. But now that you bring that up, I'm going to look at that to see if it included farm worker, women farmers. I don't know that it did. So, generally some of these bills that we try, it comes back with another title and another name and another author. So I'll try to find out from her. I'll be talking to her tonight, so I'll ask her.
And a lot of urban farmers are women farmers, women of color, and first generation are immigrant farmers. And so they're helping our culinary richness here because they want to farm the crops that they
Yeah, and I don't know if there's much that I can add, but certainly it's a huge opportunity for us to have this discussion. I mean, this is a state where we have talked so much about the diversifying and ensuring that we level the playing field when it comes to creating opportunities for women in this state. And so, but to hear those statistics and those numbers, it's quite appalling that there's such low women farmers. And so certainly we've got to do much more.
Great. Yeah, those are shocking numbers for me as well. And it's pretty disappointing since a lot of my friends here in California are women farmers and underestimate how rare they are. So I think we have time for one more question. And this takes us back to farm workers. How do we prioritize? And I think we've covered this a little bit, but maybe I think it's important to talk more about how do we prioritize farm workers, receive access to testing, PPE, rental assistance, isolation services, and vaccines in counties like Monterey that have a very large immigrant farm worker community and doesn't have a multi-county healthcare entity. A very specific question, but maybe we can, if we can't target the Monterey County itself, really just talk about opportunities to support.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to lead in this question. I think, obviously there's been a lot of some discussion around equity as it relates to the distribution of this vaccination. But it's safe to say, since the onset of this pandemic nearly a year ago, I know myself and Cecilia, working through the Latino caucus, we have been fighting on this equity front through our Latino caucus for all essential workers. We've been doing it for farm workers. We come from agricultural communities, and we've been fighting for equity as it relates to testing, as it relates to contact tracing, to, as Secretary Ross mentioned, ensuring that we were alleviating a lot of this critical overcrowding to provide temporary housing. As we've seen now, the governor took action in the Housing for the Harvest program that was modeled after a program that was done in the county of Monterey. And so when it comes to this vaccination, I think that there's so many different factors that we have to look at, to ensure that we are doing everything we can to reach and to assist these farm workers who largely have been living for the last 4 years under the Trump administration in the shadows. There's so much fear amongst our farm working communities around, fears of deportation, and, they're very reluctant to get any kind of services, healthcare services, and so for us, when it talks about, the distribution of this vaccine, it's great that the governor has that he's given priority status to farm workers, but making the vaccine available is just not enough. It's about access. Just opening up a mass vaccination site isn't going to ensure that our farm workers are that they're going to get inoculated. It's going to require a very aggressive effort to work with some nonprofits, some community agencies that have pre-existing relationships with farm workers, that there's that level of trust. And then, obviously when it comes to supply, I'm very confident that in all agricultural regions in the state that, efforts have been made to ensure that the logistics are in place, but now we just need the supply. And so it's really reassuring, as Secretary Ross said, that, there's, more vaccines are coming, that the governor's prioritized these for agricultural regions. And I am absolutely positive that we are going to inoculate a lot of farm workers in the coming weeks.
And, we do have one, problem issue too, is that, some of our Black and Hispanic adults still remain more wary of getting the vaccination.
That's right.
So once again, we need to, educate, and go to trusted places. So for instance, churches, if they do vaccinations in churches, you'll see probably more people show up. They want to make sure it's a safe environment. They're trusted in our, small clinics. It's a trusted place for them to go get. But again, it's education, and we're really concerned. Some of the statistics that I've just seen in the past, day are just like, oh my gosh, we got to get the word out that it's safe to do. But for years, not everybody was treated fairly. And when the vaccinations went out years ago, people are still very apprehensive. So we got lots of work still to do, and we're going to get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, I just want to add that this is a combination, and I'm really seeing some new partnerships being built between the agricultural employer community and the CBOs, people that are sitting at a table. And one positive example, first of all, the first housing for that harvest program was built off the Monterey growers and shippers, who, instead of waiting for us in government to go, oh, is this a good program? How are we going to fund it? They just said, this is important for us to do. We want safe housing. And they booked the hotel rooms, they booked the food service, they booked the wellness checks, they booked the transportation. And we built our program based off that model. And kudos to Chris Valadez and his work with CRLA and others to really start to build strong partnerships. Ventura has similar kind of a farm worker resource group that's going on. And Fresno, interestingly enough, they have probably vaccinated as many farm workers as anybody, because they, from the day one, started thinking about what's our plan for vaccination when it does come. And they designed pilot programs to see what works best for out on the farm, small, larger institutions. And I will say the uptake percentages are very high. And I think it's because the CBOs and the employers are working together to get the word out. So we have some new models here. Let's not lose this kind of collaboration. There will be a day after COVID, but let's hope we have new partnerships that are long lasting. I know some days, I'm starting to feel like it's never going to end.
Let's not waste a big pandemic. Let's not waste it. We did it with the fires, right? And we start going down the track. We really need to work on our emergency management plan throughout the state. So whether it's earthquake, fire, pandemic, we got to be more prepared than we have been.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have hit time, but I think I could talk to y'all all day. It's truly been a pleasure to get this chance to speak with three of y'all, because I feel like if we weren't, the one silver lining, if there could be, from COVID, is I can get the three of y'all in a virtual room. Especially since often the small farm conference happens across the state. We would have had to drag you somewhere and take a full day or 2 days to show up. So this is an incredible opportunity. So I want to thank you all so much again for joining this session. I also want to thank our attendees for participating and having such incredible questions. And I hope that we've been able to answer a lot of these. We're talking policy tomorrow at 11. Please check out the website and get involved. That's another forum. And again, I want to thank our panelists, because I'm really grateful that you guys could take the time to talk with me and talk with us. So
Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you so
Love
much.
Thank
being on
you.
the panel with these two. I do it every day.
it's good to know. I'll keep that in mind in the future.
And we learn from each other. That's the best part.
Always.
Always.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
righty,
you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
thanks.
Thank you.